The Leatherman by Lux Noctis. Narrated by Scott H., aka Hootey. Music by Mew.
Some on this planet are content, satisfied with their lot, and able to sit idly by, static whilst all else is in motion. Others are not quite so inclined to remain in place. They seek out a calling or a cause, something to fight for, a goal to achieve, a purpose that they create for themselves. One such man is Walter Kappa, a former investigative journalist who traveled far and wide as a result of his occupation. Walter has covered conflict and rebellion, his journeys a whirlwind of blood and betrayal, corruption and violence. Stoically speaking to a lens as gunshots split the air mere feet away can have a certain effect on a human being, and after many years wandering war-torn countries, the journalist became numb. Watching the lifeless husks of innocent youths being carelessly dragged from the rubble should never become routine, but that is exactly what death and destruction became to him. Just another day at the office. When this fact dawned on Walter, he could not shake the feeling that in some way his very humanity was eroding. He was growing ever more callous and heartless. As a result, he decided that it was time to bid farewell to his former profession and enter what he felt was a well-earned early retirement. It wasn't long, though, before the novelty of unlimited leisure time started to grate on the nerves of this former globetrotter. He found himself drawn back towards the dark world he had left behind. At times, this made him uneasy, as the magnetic attraction he felt when faced with both the bloody and the bleak should probably be a cause for concern, he thought. However, that feeling seemed to disappear within a few blurry frames as he perched on his comfortable chair, peering closely at the shattering skull of a Syrian rebel. Walter spent his twilight hours, face pale in front of the glowing monitor, guiltily savoring all the depravity the vast wastes of the internet had to offer. He stumbled across stories of strange disappearances, bizarre happenings, and conspiracy theories. Soon he was adrift in a world of abstract fantasy, immersed in an ethereal place where fact and fiction blur until neither are truly independent. Swiftly, sitting behind the screen was no longer enough. Walter once again became a moving piece on the board, actively seeking out the truth behind the virtual whispers. The miles swept by beneath him as he took to the skies again. There were no longer cameras, but there was a motivation far more personal than a paycheck, for he had rediscovered the thrill of the chase. The thought of uncovering a shadowy truth behind mysterious circumstances exhilarated him to no end. But alas, he was seemingly always one step behind his imperceptible targets. Disappointed, he waited in Glasgow airport. His excursion to the Scottish moors had ended with a derelict manner and a wall of silence. He hit the keys hard in irritation as he researched his next objective, a village in Europe that had suddenly gone silent. No one who traveled there ever returned, or so the rumors stated. This time, it was a story whose origins were far closer to home than he was accustomed to. Walt wasn't holding his breath, though. A secluded settlement is a prime breeding ground for wild speculation and internet nonsense. The perfect starting point for the kind of bored 13-year-olds who live to weave woeful tales and watch as 1,000 gullible fools scramble to furiously Google search their way to wisdom. So it was with a sigh that Walter Kappa, investigative journalist turned full-time bullshit inspector, trundled along a dirt road, heading heavenward amongst mountainous terrain. His rental car reeked of stale smoke, with a hint of pine scent from the swinging two-dimensional tree that seemed intent on obscuring his view of the precarious trail. The fleeing sun made him cautious of his speed, as there were no lights to speak of aside from the pitiable ones attached to his vehicle. A long drive off a short cliff didn't seem overly appealing. A second sigh escaped his lips when the near-invisible track widened, but this time it was one of relief. He came to a steady halt at the base of a tall gate. Ornate swirls of cast black iron twisted towards the sparkling stars, and the spikes at its peak were aimed at the moon. He couldn't see much of the mysterious village, barely lit as it was by ancient-looking gas lanterns off in the distance. What he could see, however, was a small girl who sat on cobbled stones next to a lantern of her own, back facing toward him. She played idly with a battered-looking rag doll, paying him no mind. Walter attempted to open the gate, in spite of the chains wrapped around its metalwork. The clattering links startled the girl. She turned, glancing at him with pale blue eyes, and then returned to fiddling with her doll. Looking to his left and right, he saw a sheer drop and a tall cliff face, respectively. With limited options, he tried the gate again. This time, the girl didn't even grant him a glance. "Excuse me," Walter said, irritated. "Aren't you gonna let me inside?" His hands wrapped around frosty spirals. The girl stood, looking up at him, her features lacking expression. "Are you sure you want to come in here?" she asked, as though reading lines from a script she didn't care for. This left Walter bemused, as he wondered who might leave a little girl outside and alone so late at night. Yeah, of course I'm sure," he replied, waving his hand dismissively. She remained silent, maintaining eye contact with him throughout a long and awkward pause. "You're absolutely certain?" "I told you, yeah, I want in," Walter spoke again, this time a little more irately. "Last chance to turn back, mister," the child spoke quickly. "Just open the damn gate, kid," he said with a tone of finality. In silence, she approached the heavy, heart-shaped lock that held the chains in place. Then the child proceeded to pull a large, rusty key from inside her wine-red dress. It was draped around her neck on a tired-looking string. With a dull clunk, the lock was released, and the aging gate creaked open. Walter stepped onto the uneven stone ground, and while he still doubted the oddball online rumors about the village, he was forced to admit to himself that a strange atmosphere did indeed drench the place. It was unnaturally quiet. With a soft rattle, the child replaced the lock. "Just who are you trying to keep out of here anyway?" Walter asked, observing the fence preventing any entrance to the isolated plateau on which the village stood. "I'm not keeping anyone out, mister," she told him, concealing the key. "Well, you could have fooled me," he muttered. The girl retrieved her tatty rag doll and began to stroll away. "Hey, aren't you supposed to watch the gate or something?" "Nah, I don't feel like it anymore," she replied casually without looking back, doll in tow. "Wait, kid, what's with this place? Where is everyone?" "They're around, mister," the child stated, skipping towards the shadowy buildings. "Would you just wait up?" Walt pleaded, setting off to follow her. After all, she was the closest thing to a lead he had, as there wasn't another soul in sight. Their footsteps resounded through the cold night. Curtains twitched in the lead-framed windows around them, revealing for brief instances fragments of ghostly faces. Elongated shadows danced just beyond the reach of yielding light, and each building looked distinct and handcrafted, tilting this way and that. In an ever-changing glow, the solid structures appeared fluid in nature, pliable in a way Walter knew they never could be. The girl came to a halt at a gothic-looking water fountain. The twisted forms of watchful gargoyles stood guard over the village's central plaza. Water with a green hue spewed in a shimmering torrent from between their bared teeth, cascading downwards, creating bubbles where it fell. She sat on the dampened edge of the grotesque-looking fountain and kicked her feet playfully back and forth. Walter's eyes shot from window to window, greeted by bright glares from darkened rooms. He breathed that same old sigh, briefly considering approaching the homes of the reclusive residents and requesting an explanation. The old-timer was less than adept at speaking to kids. The ex-journalist walked towards a residence completely encased in winding ivy and knocked heavily on the door with his calloused knuckles.
"They won't speak to you, you know,"
the increasingly irritating kid called to him. He groaned, wishing he'd never had the urge to leave the familiar gloom in which he existed at home. "Well, will you?" he shouted back, arms outstretched. Walt's withering eyes could barely make out tiny shoulders shrugging. Head lowered in exasperation, he made his way back to the fountain, realizing the situation might require a slightly more personable approach than he was accustomed to. Reaching the enigmatic child, he dropped down low to be at her eye level. "Look, let's start over. You don't have to call me Mister. My name's Walter. I've heard some strange things about this place. I'm hoping to find out what, if anything, is going on here. I'm thinking maybe you can help me. What's your name, kid?" Walt did his best to sound earnest, but had no idea if he succeeded.
"They call me Hope around here, Mr. Walter. I'm sorry, but I don't think anything can help you now."
Hope peered up at him through hair as dark as the night sky, shaking her head as she talked. "Hope, huh? Cute name," he grumbled. "Nothing can help me now. What do you mean?"
"Because he won't let you leave. He doesn't let anybody leave,"
Hope said. Had either of them looked at the ivy-covered house, they'd have seen the door open just a fraction and witnessed gaunt fingers creeping over its rugged oak surface. Walt's gaze narrowed in bewilderment. "Who would want to stop anybody from leaving?" the retired reporter asked.
"It's the Leatherman. He keeps everyone inside this place."
Hope hopped off of the wall and scuffed her delicate-looking shoe across the ground, looking sullen. Even Walter's well-traveled mind didn't know what to make of this. He wondered who would have a motive to keep everyone trapped in such a manner, and how was it even possible to do so? The village was like a ghost town, and all that seemed to stand between the residents and freedom was a small child and a locked gate. It didn't seem to make any sense. "Do you know where I can find this Leatherman?" he inquired in the gruff tenor of a man who'd seen far too much in his time.
"He's up there."
Hope pointed to the peak of a clock tower at the end of a winding street. Diffused light passed through the tower's weathered face. A large arched window stood open in parallel, and an ancient-looking bell hung above.
"He never comes out."
Walter scratched idly at the stubble on his chin, curious how a man who never ventured outside could have such power over people, if any of what the kid said was true. Before he could ask anything further, the gentle patter of the fountain's murky waters became lost beneath a female voice crying out, "Joshka, no!" A woman screeched all too late. Hope was thrown off her feet as the man known as Joshka struck her. The rag doll was sent spiraling into the bubbling fountain. The little girl collapsed to the frosty stones, and the key around her neck was swiftly snatched away. The instant the key had fallen into Joshka's grasp, the gargantuan bell at the tower's summit began to toll. He sprinted towards the gate, his ragged clothing flapping in the breeze. An ominous rattle filled the sky, the sound of 1,000,000 fluttering wings. A hideous murky mass appeared from the window of the clock tower, spilling forth with a liquid fluidity. The writhing cloud passed overhead, and the starry sky was lost. Those below were left in shadow. "No! Someone please! Help me!" They hardly heard Joshka's pleas over the vociferous swarm. An army of colossal moths enveloped him. They descended with ferocious speed, and in such great numbers that nothing could be seen beyond their shifting veil. It was over as quickly as it had begun. Starlight returned, but not a trace of Joshka remained. The key lay solitary on the ground. Walter approached Hope and helped her to her feet as a heavy unease settled in the pit of his gut. Something really was awry in that strange, godforsaken place. All was soundless, aside from the cauldron-like churning of the grim green liquid and the weeping woman in the doorway of her ivy-ridden home. She clutched a baby, holding it close to her chest as she sobbed hysterically. Walter looked on with indifference, then turned his attention back to the young girl. "Are you okay?" Tears tore streaks in the dirt on her face, but she refused to make a sound. Defiant, Hope strode to retrieve her pendant of burden. Internally, Walt struggled, attempting to piece together meaningful words. Before he had the chance to settle on some semblance of soothing syllables, she spoke first.
"Where's Anna?"
Hope peered around with searching eyes. "Anna?"
"My doll Anna, where is she?"
she asked with a parent's concern. Walter glanced into the fountain, seeing the ragdoll's rippling silhouette obscured beneath the water surface. He pointed with a gray, aged finger.
"Oh no,"
she groaned, clambering over the wall with a splash. Waist deep, she plodded forwards, wading her way through. The child became almost fully submerged as she snatched up her prized possession, her delicate features reflected by a murky mirror in motion. She held Anna close, appearing much like the weeping mother who was still lost in her own personal hell.
"I need to take better care of her,"
she told Walter as she gracelessly climbed back onto dry land. "Why is it so important to you?" A world-weary wanderer with no fraction of innocence remaining could never truly understand.
"She is important because she is my friend, Mr. Walter,"
Hope said in a matter-of-fact manner, squeezing the doll to drain the putrid liquid from its fabric body.
"Anna's the only one who speaks to me. She's the only one who can leave here, and she doesn't have to carry any dumb old key around. Anna tells me about the world outside this place."
The child stared at the damp doll intently, a slight frown twisting her lips. Kappa's mind only latched on to a singular point. "So if I tried to leave here, those things would attack me too?"
Hope nodded in response to his question, beginning to shiver in her sodden red dress.
The old man groaned. He had just witnessed something truly bizarre, something that, even in his most hazardous of occupations, he had never come across before. He realized his choices were limited. It was either continue his search for the truth, or join the pathetic spectral figures that inhabited that village of the damned forevermore. Not much of a choice at all. "How can I meet this Leatherman?"
"There is only one way to meet him,"
Hope said apprehensively. "What is it?"
"I don't want you to get hurt, mister,"
she said anxiously, shaking her head. "Don't worry about me. Trust me. I'll have seen worse than whatever this freak has to offer," Walt assured her. He had been to hell and back, seen and heard things most couldn't begin to imagine. Old Walter wasn't afraid of anything anymore.
"You're brave, mister. If you're sure, then you'll have to take this."
Hope hesitated for a moment, then removed the key from her neck and held it in an outstretched hand.
"But you have to promise me that you will come back."
Walt faltered for a second. If he took it, it was a pretty safe bet that those things would come for him, but he had no idea what would happen next. Still, curiosity beckoned, its allure too strong to resist. He reached forward to retrieve the key, but the child recoiled.
"Promise me and cross your heart."
Her eyes narrowed warily. "Okay, I promise I'll come back." He made a crossing motion over his chest. and then she finally allowed him to take the key. As the bell began to toll again, a pang of fear struck him in a way it hadn't in many years. Hope stepped back, and Walter clutched the key tightly as the sound of fluttering wings took the night once more. He found it difficult to defy his instinct to flee, but stood his ground as the countless creatures whirled around him. Walt dropped the key and shielded himself as best he could against their onslaught. Their number was so overwhelming that his world became nothing but that dreadful cloud of insects. The inquisitive man could not see the hands that grabbed him and dragged him free of the earth. The child watched reluctantly as her new friend was taken away. She squeezed her drenched doll tightly and spoke softly to herself. "Remember your promise, mister." Walter hit the soft carpet to a symphony of scattering moths. They spread erratically, glowed red hot, and burned to cinders in the air. From his face-down position, he heard the telltale sound of feet beating metal, an unknown entity escaping up into the space where the vast bell hung. The rhythmic tick of the huge clock accompanied his own rapid breathing, that of another, and the nauseating sound of teeth meeting flesh.
"A pleasure to meet you."
A voice came, one which sounded like many speaking in unison. A booming, malevolent chuckle seemed to shake the room itself.
Help me."
Walter turned to see what remained of Joshka reaching out towards him, scarcely recognizable. Now less than human, he was mutilated beyond a point Walter had thought possible to survive. The jaded ex-journalist ascended to his knees. He was at the center of a dim, gaslit room. Ahead of him stood an antique ebony desk, inset with complex carvings. Blood wound its way down through the intricate pattern, staining the decorative rug beneath. What sat in the throne-like seat behind it chilled him to his bones.
You're the Leatherman?"
Walter asked, shock abound. A short bark of twisted laughter left the monster's jaws.
"Is that what that little bitch is calling me?"
He grinned with a row of long, needle-like teeth.
"I'll be sure to thank her for that."
With a decaying black tongue, he licked at the blood on his palm.
What the hell are you?"
Walt virtually choked on his words.
"Me. I am something beyond your comprehension. A being who perfectly personifies how weak and pathetic your fragile race truly is."
The Leatherman's many voices spoke with disdain, and he proceeded to take a hold of the pile of pulpy tissue placed in front of him, sinking savage points deep into the silky mass. Walter looked on with disgust. The monstrosity he faced was vaguely human in shape, but its skin was coarse and dark, rising in jagged peaks. The Leatherman dropped the gory heap back onto the desk, having devoured as much as he desired.
"I don't understand,"
Walter muttered.
"I wouldn't expect you to, pig."
The creature spat its words, and flecks of red came soaring with them. What was left of Joshka writhed, pained on the ground. A ghastly, gargling sound emanated from his clogged throat as he struggled to breathe. "Then enlighten me. Why trap the people here?" Walt spoke cautiously, hoping not to anger the beast. Its snake-like nostrils flared.
"It is a small part of something greater. Something which you will not have the pleasure of bearing witness to."
A frightening claw traced lines on the scarlet desk, and soft tissue adhered to the terror's fingertip. "But why? Why are you doing this?" He gestured towards Joshka. "This man, I think he has a child. And the girl down there, why give her the key? Surely there's no reason for that." Walter tried to maintain a calm and sensible tone in spite of the insane circumstances. The Leatherman's wide diamond eyes set on Joshka, and another perverted chuckle broke free.
Never underestimate the importance of entertainment, my friend,
he smirked. You're sick, Walt said, failing to sound forceful.
Oh, how sweet of you to act like you care.
The whore twisted its head in mock sincerity.
That man will become more than you could ever hope to be, cretin. I tire of your presence.
The towering being began to crawl forwards. He slinked over the ghastly contents of the desk, hands crushing what remained of his meal. A broad, barbed tail rose menacingly at his back. Either side of his spine, scarred flesh arose, the remnants of wings that once were. The ex-reporter backed away, but escape was impossible. His eyes scoured the room and fell upon nothing but dusty antiques. Joshka clutched weakly at his leg for a moment and tried to speak with failing lungs. The Leatherman pounced, pinning Walter by the throat to a cluttered bookcase. With his feet far from the ground, the old-timer fought for breath, but it was hopeless. Steadily, the world became indistinct. The guttural voices sounded distant as the formidable tail hovered right before Walter's open, streaming eye.
No, you are not worthy.
The monster took a single claw and pushed it deep into the retired journalist's throat. It ran a clean line across his feeble neck and watched the colors run free.
What a shame you won't be here to see how it all ends.
The Leatherman grinned. His words carried the stench of death. The monster looked satisfied as the life leaked from the human's open wound. When the shuddering finally ceased, it carried the lifeless husk to the open window and cast it out into the night. The clock ticked and talked as the corpse met the ground far below with a thud. A small girl, garbed in a wine-red dress, saw something lying in the street.
Mr. Walter?